Good morning. Good morning. You're all very, very welcome, and I see a number of new faces in the church, and a special Céad Míle Fáilte to you, and I'm sure many of you are here to enjoy the incredible music that's been going on in Belfast all week, the Fleadh Ceol and the Heron. And to some extent, our service this morning, we've decided to attempt to make our service operate in harmony with the Fleadh. So we'll be celebrating with music, words, poetry, and linking it into, particularly for the history of this church, with the Drummond family. Because if you have a look at the plaques on the back wall, when you're later on leaving the church, and you'll notice that there's a plaque to William Hamilton Drummond, who was here from 1800 to 1815. And then his grandson, equally, William Hamilton Drummond, who was here from 1900 to 1909. So we'll be saying a little bit about them and their connection with the church and their connection with music and poetry. William Hamilton Drummond, the elder, he ended up minister of Strand Street Unitarian Church in Dublin. And after the death of his first wife, Barbara Toome, he married Catherine Blakely of Dublin. And through the service, I'll mention his two sons and his grandson. His son, Robert Blakely Drummond, and his other son, James, and his grandson, William Hamilton Drummond Jr. However, as always in this church, there will be lots of audience participation. We usually call that hymn singing. So you're welcome to join in as we sing our first hymn. And may I just mention, our first hymn is Be Thou My Vision. And Be Thou My Vision originated as an ancient Irish poem attributed to the 6th century poet and monk Dallan Fergoil. And in Irish it was Rob to Mavuila. It was translated into English in 1905 by Mary Elizabeth Byrne, well-known Irish linguist, author, and journalist. And the tune is Slain, originates from an old secular ballad, With My Love on the Road, published in 1909 by Patrick W. Joyce. So, Be Thou My Vision.
Be
one of the best versions of Be Thou My Vision, and I'm not saying what you sang this morning isn't one of the best versions, but is a version by Van Morrison along with the Chieftains. I think it's out on a record by Van Morrison, but it's an incredible version. Now, Gareth is going to play a tune for us, and it is a tune, and people will know the tune by another name, and it's the poem Down by the Sally Gardens by William Butler Yeats. And the tune is The Maids of Morn, and it was set to music by Herbert Hughes in 1909. Down by the Sally Gardens, my love and I did meet. She passed the Sally Gardens with little snow-white feet. Garth. Thank you very much, Gareth. As I mentioned, that Drummond had two sons, James, who went to London and eventually ended up the principal of a college in Oxford, and the other son, Robert Blackley Drummond, ended up in the famous St. Mark's Unitarian Chapel in Edinburgh, and he was noted for his services that included music and poetry. And he was also a great exponent of the famous Scottish Robbie Burns. And he included these words in a special address to Robbie Burns on the 30th of January 1859. If any apologies required to excuse a lecture on Robert Burns, addressed to Scotsmen by one who is not himself, a native of the country with the genius of Burns, adorned it may be sufficient to observe that the poet is the possession of the world. He belongs to no one age or country for the simple reason that he belongs to all. It is his high office to give utterance to the universal feelings and affections of the human heart. Great words about Robbie Burns. Now, I'm going to attempt, with my Dublin accent and everything that goes with it, to read a section of a lovely poem by Robbie Burns to his friend, to Davy, a brother poet. And this is a small excerpt from that long poem. It's no in titles nor in rank, it's no in wealth like Lunham Bank, to purchase peace and rest. It's no in making muckle mair. It's no in books, it's no in lair, to make us truly blessed, if happiness has not had her seat and centre in the breast. We may be wise or rich or great, but never can be blessed. Nay, treasures nor pleasures could make us happy lang. The heart is the part that makes us right or wrong. The great words of Robbie Burns. And now we'll sing together our second hymn. And our second hymn is the Psalm 23, The Lord is my shepherd. And it's mostly sung to the tune Drummond, named after Drummond Church in Aberdeenshire, a small town in Scotland. And it's believed that the tune was composed by Jessie Seymour Irvine, daughter of Reverend Alexander Irvine, the minister of the church in Drummond. The Lord is my shepherd.
a reflection on the Fleadh. Walking round Belfast with thousands of others, buzzing street corners with instruments zinging, fiddling and fluting, plucking and drumming, blowing and beating, accordions squeezing, pipe bands and flute bands, trad bands and rock bands, marching bands and ceilidh bands, and even Irish rap. Dancers in Irish, shoes clicking, arms straight. Dancers in Scottish, hands, arms a-flinging. Indian dancers, graceful and patterned. Everyone dancing, there at the ceilidh, swaying and rocking, moving and jigging, tapping and clapping, and letting things swing. Fleadh Ceol na hÉireann, Gaeilge and Ulster Scots, born of this island, sharing traditions, hearing each other, learning to listen, learning to welcome locals, newcomers, in each other's shelter. And don't forget the Mela too. Children, young people just starting their music, growing their skills and impressing us all, cheerfully busking, talent emerging, music's strong future grasped by each one. Ceol le Ceile, voices in consort, lively ensembles, choirs, solo singers. Sound out the message that music can offer. Many traditions tuning together, crossing the boundaries, enjoying the differences, harmony shaping community. Listening, learning, combining, creating, making some sense from the buzz and crack, a rainbow of meaning, a time for reflecting, a prayer for renewing, a spirit is stirring, deep presence, and even the holy ground once more. The holy ground once more. May the Fleadh be a gesture, a sign of what could be, a hand of new friendship, a token of sharing. Pitch, rhythm, melody, dissonance, harmony. We all need each other for music, for living, something emerging, creative and new. Or, as Van Morrison said many years ago, wouldn't it be great if it was like this all the time?
Norman, would I be so bold to ask, is that your own composition? Congratulations, that was wonderful. Absolutely wonderful.
So I want to share a song. The words are a Celtic prayer written by Canon David Adam, who was vicar on Lindisfarne, Holy Island, for a number of years. And he had this talent for writing prayer poems. And he asked myself and another singer to set some of them to Irish or Scottish airs. So I chose some and went off to Central Library and got down the Ancient Music of Ireland book of many, many tunes collected by Edward Bunting. And I matched up these words, reaching out to a tune called Sláinte Fleadh Cheoil.
us. I reach out in love towards all who come to me. I reach out in love, in openness and friendship. I reach out in love, in kindness and forgiveness. I reach out in love to my neighbor and find God. We reach out in love towards our friends and our enemies. We reach out in love, in peacemaking and justice. We reach out in love, in caring and compassion. We reach out in love to the stranger and find God.
I've chosen this little poem by W.B. Yeats, in which he suggests, possibly quite rightly, that the musicians and the dancers will get into heaven first before anybody else. It's called The Fiddler of Dooney. When I play my fiddle in Dooney, folk dance like a wave of the sea. My cousin is priest in Kilvarnet, my brother in Muckrabui. I passed my brother and cousin. They read in their books of prayer. I read in my book of songs I bought at the Sligo Fair. When we come at the end of time to Peter sitting in state, he will smile on the three old spirits, but call me first through the gate. For the good are always the merry, saved by an evil chance, and the merry love the fiddle, and the merry love to dance. And when the folk they spy me, they will come up to me, with "Here is the fiddler of Dooney," and dance like a wave of the sea. Now, if you'd like to stand in body or in spirit for the Lord's Prayer, I am going to say it as Gaeilge, but if you would like to say it as Gaeilge with me, or in English, or indeed in any other language you're comfortable with, it may sound like a weird cacophony, but God won't mind. Our nahar atar nyav, gonei fadanam, godagad ariot, goneinta the holler and talav marienter and yav, and aron le hul tor doing and you, agus mat doing our veka, maravahmidne dar vekuna fein, agus nálig sinna gahu ag ser sinna og, or is latsa an riocht, agus an chomacht, agus an chlor, tre hail na sail. Amen.
Thank you, Isabella. And thank you, Jacinth. Now, as I mentioned, William Hamilton Drummond, who was minister here from 1800 to 1815, but later on his son was minister here, William Hamilton Drummond, Og or Junior. Now, another person was in the city of Belfast at the time, Edward Bunting. Edward Bunting was born in Armagh and from an early age was very musical. He did his early music training in the town of Drogheda. He was later appointed sub-organist in St. Anne's, which later became St. Anne's Cathedral, Belfast. And he served his time to the noted William Warr. Bunting became familiar with traditional Irish tunes, and he believed there was a danger they would be lost in time. Later, when the noted Belfast Harp Festival took place in 1792, Bunting was employed to transcribe the Irish tunes which were to be played by the harpists. The thinking behind the festival was to celebrate the storming of the Bastille during the French Revolution. Later, he published a general collection of the ancient Irish music in 1796, and this was later published by the famous music family in Dublin, Waltons. Bunting parted company with St. Anne's Cathedral because he was interested in secular music as well as sacred music. So he teamed up with Reverend William Hamilton Drummond, who was minister here and then went to Dublin. And he became the organist in Second Congregation, Rosemary Street, which is in the centre of the city. And this was the first installation of an organ in a Presbyterian church. So both Drummond and Bunting had become innovative in a certain way. And Second Congregation is now this church, All Souls, Elmwood Avenue. There was no stopping this man Bunting, and in 1813 he went on to organise the Belfast Musical Festival in Second Church, now All Souls, including a performance no less of Handel's Messiah. But both himself and William Hamilton Drummond were really creative in bringing music into a Presbyterian church for the first time, which has now become the norm, and was really creative, particularly with Irish music. Muriel.
Good morning, everyone. The tune I'm going to play is called in Irish Scaru na Gompanach, the Parting of Companions, and it's a very old Irish air. It was played at the Harp Festival in 1792 and was considered an ancient melody even then. Edward Bunting, as Chris said, who was the organist of this congregation for 11 years from 1806, said that it was popular opinion that the tune was composed when the Irish were being oppressed by the Danes, and that would make it over 1,000 years old. There was a final gathering of the United Irishmen in Belfast in 1795, including Thomas Russell, Samuel Neilson and Henry Joy McCracken, when Wolfe Tone was passing through Belfast to sail to America, before sailing on to France in 1796 to lobby the French government for French military help for the rebellion. Edward Bunting was asked to play at the gathering, and it is said he chose this air, The Parting of Companions.
Now, we would normally have a collection here, but we will ask you, if you are feeling generous, to make a retiring collection as you're leaving the church. This church has indeed quite a history. And as I mentioned, in 1900 to 1909, William Hamilton Drummond's grandson, William Hamilton Drummond Jr., was minister here. And during the same time, there was another church in York Street, and within that church was the famous Thomas Carnduff. Thomas Carnduff was a local man here, working class lad, but also became a noted poet and a noted playwright. And I like to think, in my own imagination, in my own poetry, I like to think that although Thomas Carnduff worshipped in York Street, that somehow himself and William Hamilton Drummond would have met up. I'd like to think, maybe not that they were great pals, but that Carnduff may have occasionally listened to Drummond and be inspired by his visionary words, which was the way of the Drummonds, from the grandfather, William Hamilton Drummond, to James Drummond and Blakely Drummond, and now the grandson, William Hamilton Drummond Jr. Thomas Carnduff, a working class lad, fought with the Royal Engineers in the First World War. Later, he was laid off from the shipyard, as many were, and he became a bin man in the city of Belfast. He was a member of the Independent Orange Order, which was a separate organisation from the Loyal Orange Order. And at the end of his career, he was a caretaker at the Linen Hall, the famous Linen Hall Library, where I understand there is a plaque to him, celebrating him to this day. He was, as I said, he was a poet, he was a playwright, and he was known as the island poet because of the geographic nature of the shipyard. He wrote a number of plays which were presented in the Empire Theatre, Belfast, and indeed plays that were presented or performed in the Abbey Theatre, Dublin. Plays such as the names Traitors, Castlereagh, and Workers. And when his church on York Street was tragically and sadly bombed in the Blitz in the Second World War, their congregation came here to All Souls. He was very active in the trade union movement, and his poetry was published under the following titles: Songs from the Shipyard and Songs of Out of Work. I'd like to read to you one of his poems, and it's called Men of Belfast. O city of sound and motion, O city of endless stir, from the dawn of many a morning to the fall of the evening air, from the light night of moving shadows to the sound of the shipyard horn, we hail the Queen of the Northland, we who are Belfast born. Hark to the ring of the anvil, hark to the sound of the loom, and the siren call of the steamers passing the harbour boom. The spiral curve of the smoke cloud, weaving a hazy screen, the rattle of home and vehicle in one unending stream. We gaze from the Cave Hill summit, the pride in our eyes aglow, as we look on a slumberless city that stretches her arms below. The dull red glow of the sunset fades in a purple haze, and the gloom of a darkened valley is bright with 1,000 rays. We are the men of Belfast, her sinew, marrow and bone. By the graft of our brain and muscle, we fashioned her a throne. And people, our lord, our parson, class, our creed, our clan. In a little we care for the title if they play the part of a man. With jealous card and rancour, they would crush her wide world fame. They would damn the flames of her furnaces to render her commercial lame. But her ships will ply the oceans. Her sons will ply on their trade, till the sheen of her glory will vanish and the faith of her sons will fade. The wonderful words of the working class and shipyard poet who worshipped in this church, and I like to think was a friend of William Hamilton Drummond Ogue, Thomas Carnduff. Now, our final hymn is a hymn called Wisdom Divine, and it's written by Clifford Martin Reid, who I knew, who was minister with Ipswich Unitarians for many years. He has had numerous books, hymns, etc. published by Lindsay Press, which is the Unitarian publishing company. And the hymn is sung to the Londonderry air, or as they say in Stroke City, Londonderry stroke Derry air. And that was written in 1851. And it was first transcribed, this air, from a local fiddler by Jane Ross of Limavady, County Londonderry, in 1851. It was first published in 1855 in George Petrie's collection, The Ancient Music of Ireland, later becoming associated, as you all know, with Danny Boy. Now, who wrote Danny Boy? I'm going to really surprise you. Danny Boy was written by English lawyer Fred Weatherly in 1910 in Bath in England. He also wrote Roses of Picardy and the Holy City. But we won't be singing Danny Boy today. We're singing Wisdom Divine. And before we do, I'd just like to make a tribute of this singing to Charlotte MacDonald, musician, piano player, flutist, both traditional and classical, whose funeral took place in Stirling in Scotland last week. And I was invited over to be the celebrant at that funeral. She was a noted musician, known all around the music centres around Stirling and Falkirk and down to Edinburgh. And she will be sorely missed by her husband Donald, family and friends. So I'd like to dedicate our final hymn, Wisdom Divine, to Charlotte. like to ask you all to join us for tea and coffee and lots of buns and etc. However, before we do, I'd like to thank Gareth for stepping in at short notice because Trevor's not well to do today. Gareth, thank you very much. And I'd like to thank our readers and musicians and singers, Muriel, Jacinth, Isabella and Norman. That was fantastic. Thank you very much for your contribution. And to those of you who we haven't seen before, you're more than welcome. It's a delight to have you here with us in All Souls. And I leave you with the words of William Hamilton Drummond Ode, the Younger, which could be maybe the mission statement of the week and the Fleadh, along with Norman's excellent composition. And the words are as follows. Dogma decay, creeds die, party cries are forgotten, but the spirit in man is immortal, impelling him ever upwards towards clearer vision and nobler goodness. Amen. Slán go fáil agus go manaí díobh go léir. God bless you all. See you again.